The great council hall was filled with cold light and colder hearts. Representatives from 100 species sat around the table, each wearing fine robes, strange armor, or shimmering skins. In the center, standing proud and sharp-eyed, was Commander Vexura of the Katal Empire. She was tall, silver-skinned, and known for her power, her wisdom, and her pride. The topic of the meeting was unity, how to stop small wars growing across the outer systems. One of the human ambassadors, Captain Jonas Reeve, stepped forward and spoke with calm voice. He said, "True peace will come when our species are not only allies but family." He suggested something bold, something no one had dared say out loud before. He said maybe, just maybe, it was time their species explored deeper bonds, including mating. Silence fell over the council, and then the silence broke with laughter. Vexura laughed so hard her voice echoed through the hall like a battle horn. Others turned to look, some smiling nervously, some frowning. But Vexura didn't care. Mating with a human? She scoffed, shaking her head. "You are soft, warm-blooded, and fragile. You walk like prey, not warriors. Your kind talks too much of love and feelings, while we Katal build empires on strength, not emotions." Captain Jonas said nothing at first. He just looked at her, calm but unreadable. He nodded once, then stepped back. The council moved on, but the air was heavier. Some species whispered that Vexura was rude. Others agreed with her. But Jonas didn't react. He simply walked out quietly. After the meeting ended, later that day, Vexura received orders for a joint diplomatic mission. A simple flight to a neutral moon station, nothing dangerous. Just travel. But to her shock and irritation, she learned she would be traveling with Jonas Reeve, alone. Her ship, a sleek Katal cruiser, was fast but small, and the human was already waiting inside. Vexura narrowed her eyes at him, but said nothing. He simply nodded and smiled slightly, then returned to checking systems. She sat at the pilot's chair, trying to ignore him. For the first few hours, there was silence. Vexura kept her focus on flying, while Jonas hummed quietly, fixing wires and scanning data. Then the alert sounded an asteroid field ahead, bigger than expected. "Hold on," Vexura warned, gripping the controls. But a sudden hit shook the ship. Alarms blared, and the engines began to fail. They were going down. The ship spun wildly through the asteroid belt, caught by strange gravity from a nearby unmarked moon. Everything went dark. Vexura woke up on the forest floor, her body bruised but alive. The ship was broken in pieces, smoke rising from behind the trees. She sat up fast and looked around. Where was the human? She found him under a broken wing of the ship, pinned but conscious, blood on his forehead, but smiling weakly. "Told you. Space travel with me is always exciting," he joked. Vexura rolled her eyes but pulled him free. They were stuck now, no comms, no ship, and no way to contact the council. Vexura and Jonas began to build a small shelter from the wreckage. She didn't want to admit it, but his hands were fast, smart, and skilled. He didn't complain, didn't talk much, just worked beside her. When night fell, strange cries came from the jungle around them. Eyes glowed in the dark, and sharp screeches echoed through the trees. Vexura picked up a broken metal rod and stood guard. Jonas stayed close, watching her back. That night, as they sat beside the weak fire, Jonas finally spoke. "You really believe your kind is better than mine?" Vexura looked at him and replied, "We are stronger, faster, born to lead." He nodded slowly, then said, "Maybe. But sometimes, strength is knowing when to protect, not just fight." She didn't answer, but his words stayed in her mind longer than she liked. That night, she didn't sleep well, not because of the jungle, but because of the quiet warmth she felt from sitting next to a human she had laughed at only hours ago. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the trees, something ancient stirred, watching them, waiting. The jungle around them never rested, even in daylight. Strange roars echoed through the tall, twisted trees. The sky was pale green, the air thick with fog, and every plant seemed alive. Vexura moved like a soldier, alert and quiet, while Jonas followed carefully, his limp slowing him just a bit. They had found a better shelter half of the ship's cockpit wedged between rocks. Vexera patched the roof with vines and metal, while Jonas created traps around it using leftover wiring. They worked as a team, even without words. But something in the air had changed. It started with her skin. Vexera would wake up sweating, her pulse racing, her muscles tightening for no reason. She blamed the jungle heat at first, but deep down, she knew this wasn't just heat. This was something her kind called the wild bloom, an ancient biological response triggered by deep exposure to untamed nature. For Ketal females, it meant only one thing, the beginning of the bonding phase. She had never gone through it before. She wasn't mated, had never chosen a partner, and now, her body was reacting like it had found someone, but that someone was a human. No, she told herself, it wasn't possible. The scent, the sounds, the way her skin buzzed when Jonas stood close. It was all just the planet playing tricks. Still, she began keeping more distance, avoiding his eyes, but Jonas noticed. "You okay?" he asked one night as he stirred their meal, a strange fruit stew. "Fine," she answered too quickly. "Just the air here. It messes with my head." Jonas nodded, but his eyes studied her. She turned away. That night, the jungle came alive. Louder than ever, roars and hisses circled their camp, and something large brushed against the outer traps. Jonas reached for the spear he had made, but Vexera was already out, her blade ready. She moved like a shadow, silent and fast. The beast was massive, six-legged, black-scaled, with yellow eyes. It lunged toward the shelter, and Jonas moved to block it. "No!" Vexera shouted, pushing him back. The creature swiped at her, but she ducked and drove her blade into its neck. It shrieked, then vanished into the fog. Jonas stared at her, his chest heaving. "You could have died," he said. She just shrugged, but her hands were shaking. "I don't need protecting," she whispered. "Yeah," he said softly. "But sometimes it's not about need." Vexera sat alone for hours after that, watching the fire burn low. Why had she risked herself like that? Why did she feel this burning behind her ribs whenever he smiled at her? The next morning, she bathed in the cool spring nearby. But as she touched the water, her fingers trembled again. Her body was changing, her senses sharpening, her skin more sensitive. She felt like she was being pulled by an invisible string toward him, always toward him. That evening, the rain poured harder than before. Their shelter trembled, the wind howled, and the temperature dropped. Vexera sat curled in the corner, trying to hide her shivering. Jonas noticed, without asking. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, sitting close. His warmth reached through the thick blanket. His scent, simple and clean, reached her nose. She didn't move away. She closed her eyes and leaned just slightly against him. Jonas didn't speak, didn't touch her more, didn't assume anything. And that, somehow, made her heart ache worse. This was no longer just survival. Something ancient and real was waking up between them. Something she had mocked in front of the council, but now, her body and heart were telling a different story. She fell asleep against his shoulder that night, and in her dreams, she wasn't a commander, a warrior, or a Ketal noble. She was just a woman, and beside her, a man who never asked her to change, only offered warmth in a wild, dangerous world. But deep in the jungle, that six-legged beast returned. This time it didn't attack, it watched. It had seen something it didn't understand. Two creatures from different worlds forming a bond that should not exist. And it was not the only thing watching. The jungle had calmed, but something in the air still felt heavy. The rain had stopped, and the fog lifted, revealing more of the strange world around them. Vexera moved ahead with her scanner, trying to map the area. Jonas followed with a limp, carrying tools and food scraps. Their shelter was holding up, but supplies were getting low. They needed to find a power source from the wreckage, or they would be stuck forever. Vexera didn't mind danger, but something else was distracting her now. Her body still burned at night. Her dreams filled with strange heat and whispers, and always Jonas was there, his voice, his scent, his touch. She hated it, feared it, yet couldn't escape it. Every time he looked at her with those calm human eyes, something inside her softened, but she buried it, deep beneath duty and control. She told herself she was stronger than instincts, until the accident. They were searching near a sharp ridge where parts of the ship had crashed. Vexera climbed easily, but Jonas slipped on wet stone. She turned too late, just in time to hear him cry out. He fell hard, metal scraping across his leg, and tumbled into a shallow ravine. "Jonas," she shouted, jumping down after him. His leg was bleeding badly, deep and red. He tried to laugh to ease her panic, but his face was pale. "Guess humans weren't made for jungle marathons," he whispered. "Shut up." She snapped, but her voice shook. She tore fabric from her armor and wrapped his leg tightly. Her hands worked fast, but her heart pounded louder than any beast's roar. She had seen soldiers die before. She had buried comrades, but this was different. The thought of losing him made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. She dragged him back through the jungle, lifting him across her shoulders like he weighed nothing. The firelight was already flickering when they reached the shelter. She laid him down, cleaned the wound, applied herbs she found nearby. Jonas winced, but smiled. "You've got soft hands for a warrior," he joked weakly. Vexera didn't smile back. "Stop talking," she said, but her voice was too soft to sound angry. That night, she sat beside him, watching over his sleep. Her mind was full of noise memories of the council, her laughter, her words about humans being weak. Now here he was injured, yes, but still trying to protect her, still joking, still gentle. She reached out and touched his hair. Soft, warm, human. He didn't wake, but leaned slightly toward her touch. And her heart betrayed her. She didn't pull away. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a K-tall warrior. She felt like something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. When Jonas opened his eyes in the early light, he found her watching him. She looked away quickly. "I'll bring water," she said, standing up. But Jonas stopped her with a single word. "Vexera." She turned her head just slightly. "I dreamed of you," he whispered. "Was it a nightmare?" She asked dryly. "No," he said, smiling. "It was warm." She didn't reply, but her fingers curled around the flask a little tighter. Something warm was growing inside her too, something deeper than instinct. And that scared her more than the beasts in the jungle. As she walked into the trees, the morning wind brushed against her skin. She felt her body respond again, tightening, burning. She dropped to her knees beside the spring and splashed water on her face, but then she froze. A strange sound came from her belly, faint pulsing. Her hands moved over her stomach slowly, carefully. It was too soon, impossible, yet she felt it. A flicker of life, not hers, something new, something fragile, and it was not just K-tall. Her eyes widened, her heart stopped. "No," she whispered, but the jungle only answered with silence. Vexera did not return to the shelter for a long time. She sat alone by the spring, staring at her trembling hands. The flicker she felt in her belly, it could not be real. K-tall biology didn't mix easily, especially not with humans. She tried to reason with herself, to deny what her body was telling her, but deep inside, something had changed. She had mocked the idea of bonding with a human. And now her body felt the impossible was happening. She couldn't tell Jonas, not yet, not until she understood what this meant. When she finally returned, Jonas was sitting up, wrapped in the blanket. He looked weaker, but smiled when he saw her. "I thought you got tired of jungle cooking and ran off," he said. She didn't answer, just set down the water flask and started preparing food. But Jonas noticed the way her hands moved slower than usual. He didn't push, didn't ask. He just watched her in silence. That silence felt heavier than words. Later that night, the rain returned. This time it was softer. Like a whisper falling from the sky, the fire crackled low, casting orange light across their tired faces. Vexera sat near the edge, arms wrapped around her knees. Jonas shifted closer, moving slow because of his leg. "You're always so far," he said gently, "even when we're side by side." She looked at him but said nothing. "I don't know your world, your rules," he continued, "but I know this jungle, and I know you're scared of something that isn't out there." She turned away, biting her lip. He was right, but she couldn't admit it, not out loud, not when the truth could. "Change everything." Jonas stood and limped toward her. Wrap the second blanket over her shoulders. She didn't stop him. His hand brushed her arm as he adjusted the fabric. Just a simple touch, but her body responded like fire meeting air. Her breath caught, her heart pounded, her skin lit up with warmth. She looked up at him, eyes wide. Jonas stepped back, raising his hands. "Sorry," he said, voice low. "I didn't mean." "I know." She interrupted quickly. They stood there for a long moment, the storm wrapping around them. Then, without speaking, she reached out. Her fingers touched his hand, then held it, softly, firmly, like she was asking a question without using words. Jonas didn't move, didn't speak. He just held her hand back. No pressure, no demand, only presence. Vexera leaned her head against his chest. Slowly, hesitantly, she could hear his heartbeat steady, calm, human. Her people would call this weakness, but to her, it felt like shelter when she looked up. Jonas met her gaze, not with hunger, not with control, but with quiet understanding, and when their lips met, it wasn't fire or force, it was warmth, like a long-forgotten melody finally remembered. They held each other that night, not with passion, but with care, two beings from different worlds, joined by something they didn't plan, something neither fully understood, but neither wanted to let go. When dawn came, she woke to his arms still around her. For a moment, she let herself stay there, eyes closed, listening to the wind. But then the fear returned, not of him, but of what she now carried. The child inside her, a future she never asked for, but now could not escape. As Jonas slept peacefully, Vexera stepped outside the shelter. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered a single word in her native tongue. It meant life. It meant new beginning. And suddenly the jungle didn't feel so wild anymore, but far away, hidden in the shadows. Unseen eyes continued to watch, because something ancient had awakened, something that didn't belong to either of their worlds, and it was drawing closer. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the smell of smoke and damp leaves. Ash from the fire drifted across the ground like fading memories. Inside the shelter, Jonas stirred slowly, his legs still bandaged. His first thought was warmth, the soft memory of Vexera resting against him. But when he reached out, she wasn't there. She was already outside, standing still with her back to him. The morning light made her silver skin glow softly. She held one hand on her belly, unmoving, lost in her thoughts. Jonas didn't speak right away. He knew something was shifting. Inside her, Vexera closed her eyes, her mind spinning with silent fears. She had trained for war, survived battles, led warriors, but now she faced something she had no training for, a child, a should not exist. A child that would change everything. She had tried to deny it, to say it was just instinct, just heat from the wild. But now she felt it clearly, life, small but strong, growing within her, and that life carried something human, something from Jonas. When Jonas stepped beside her, she didn't move. He looked at her carefully, noticing her clenched jaw, her quiet breathing. "You felt something, didn't you?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, not at first. Then slowly she whispered, "It's not just my body reacting, Jonas." He turned fully toward her. I think I'm with child." The words hung in the air like thunder. Jonas blinked, confused, then stunned. He opened his mouth, then closed it, searching for the right thing to say. "You're sure?" he asked, voice shaking. Vexera nodded once. "It's too early, but I know my body," she said. "This is real." Jonas sat down slowly on a nearby stone, running a hand through his hair. He didn't look afraid, just overwhelmed. After a long pause, he looked up at her. Is that dangerous for you?" She shook her head. "Not dangerous," she replied softly. "Just forbiddens." She explained how the Ketal viewed cross-species unions, how her kind believed purity was strength, how her bloodline would be dishonored, and how some in the High Council would even call the child an abomination. Jonas didn't look away. He stood and walked up to her, placing a hand gently on her arm. "Then we won't go back," he said. Vexira's eyes widened. "You would give up Earth? Your people, your world?" Jonas smiled softly. "You think Earth ever truly accepted me?" he asked. "You're the first person who looked past the uniform." She looked at him for a long time, not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as someone afraid, someone hoping, someone changing. Jonas didn't press her, didn't try to claim her. He just stood beside her, steady and warm. "I don't know what this child will be," Vexira whispered. "Then we'll find out together," Jonas replied. She looked down at his hand resting over hers, both resting on her stomach now. A quiet moment passed, and then she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, not from weakness, from release. The tears were silent, soft, hidden from the jungle, and Jonas held her. No questions, no judgment, only understanding. But even in that calm, the world around them was not still. The ground trembled softly, almost unnoticeable, far in the distance. Trees shifted unnaturally. Birds fled the canopy in fear. Something ancient was moving, something that had not awakened in centuries. It had sensed the child, not because of blood or genes, but because of possibility. A child born of two worlds, a bridge between war and peace, and such a thing had always drawn the attention of forces far older than empires. Vexira didn't feel the tremor yet, but soon she would, and when that day came, she would not only be a mother, she would become the shield between her child and everything that wanted to end it. Asterisk days passed slowly, quietly, and with cautious hope. Jonas was healing, moving more freely, his strength returning steadily. But Vexira grew restless, pacing often, her thoughts heavier each passing hour. She felt the child growing inside her stronger, clearer, impossible to ignore. She knew she couldn't hide it much longer. Her movements had slowed, her stomach felt tighter, and sometimes Jonas caught her placing her hand protectively over her belly. He noticed every change in her, but he never pushed, never asked too much. Yet she saw the question always there, waiting patiently in his eyes. One evening, as the jungle became quiet under the pale green sunset, Jonas sat by the fire, carefully sharpening a makeshift spear. Vexira stood near the shelter door, feeling a sudden wave of dizziness, her hand quickly going to her belly again. This time Jonas couldn't pretend he didn't see. He set down the spear and watched her closely. "Vexira," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm. "It's time you tell me what's happening." She stood still, not turning, her voice low and shaking as she replied. "I wanted to protect you from this truth." Jonas slowly stood, approaching carefully, sensing her tension. "What truth?" he whispered. She turned to face him, her eyes glowing softly in the firelight, filled with both fear and wonder. "I carry your child, Jonas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas stared silently, his eyes wide, emotions flashing. Across his face shock, confusion, and then quiet awe. "That's why you've been different," he said, stepping closer. "Why you've kept your distance." She nodded slowly, fighting to hold back tears. "My people would see this as betrayal, as weakness," she said. "And your people, they would not understand." Jonas stepped forward again, gently taking her hand. "Forget about them," he whispered. "What about you?" She looked into his eyes, searching deeply, her voice trembling. "I am afraid," she admitted softly. "Not of this child, but of losing it, of losing you." Jonas gently pulled her close, careful and protective. "You won't lose me," he promised. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Vexira allowed herself to lean into him, feeling safe, protected, and not alone. But as they stood holding each other, the jungle suddenly grew silent. Too silent, Jonas felt the hair rise on his neck. Vexera sensed the danger immediately, pulling away, eyes alert. Scanning the shadows, something was coming toward them, moving quietly, swiftly, and then, emerging from the darkness, appeared Katal warriors, her own people, armed and stern. Commander Vexera. Their leader spoke, his voice cold and sharp. "We've come to bring you back." His eyes moved to Jonas, filled with disgust. "And to punish the one who corrupted you." Vexera stepped forward instantly, standing between Jonas and her own warriors. Her voice was calm but fierce. "You will not touch him," she said clearly. "He is mine to protect. You betray your own blood?" The leader hissed, eyes narrowed in fury. "No," Vexera replied boldly, her hand firmly on her belly. "I protect new blood, stronger blood, our future." The warriors stared, stunned, confused. Unsure how to respond, Jonas stood beside her. Steady, strong, unafraid, and in that silent standoff, Vexera understood something clearly. She was no longer just a warrior, no longer just Katal. She was now something stronger, a mother, a protector, a bridge between two worlds, and she would fight anyone, even her own people, to keep her new family safe. The silence in the jungle felt heavier than any battle. Vexera stood firm, her body shielding Jonas from her own warriors. The Katal soldiers glared at her, confusion mixing with anger in their eyes. But none dared to move first. The Katal leader finally stepped forward, his voice harsh but uncertain. "You know the laws, Vexera," he growled softly. "You betray everything we stand for." She lifted her chin, eyes blazing with strength and resolve. "No," she said clearly. "I honor what our people have forgotten. Strength is not just power. Strength is the courage to change." Jonas stood close, his hand gently placed on her back, offering quiet support. The warriors stared at him with mistrust, but Jonas never moved, never flinched. Suddenly, a bright light appeared overhead. A human ship broke through the clouds, hovering over the clearing. The Katal soldiers raised their weapons, tense and ready, but Vexera raised a hand to stop them. "This is no battle," she said calmly. "It's a chance." The human ship landed slowly, doors opening with a hiss. A group of human soldiers stepped out carefully, weapons lowered, led by a commander who recognized Jonas instantly. "Captain Reeve," the commander called. "Are you all right?" Jonas nodded slowly, stepping forward beside Vexera. "I'm fine," Jonas replied. "But we have something important to discuss." All eyes moved toward Vexera. The commander took a step forward, noticing her protective hand placed firmly on her belly. "Commander Vexera," the human asked carefully, "is it true?" Vexera looked at Jonas, then at her warriors, and finally at the humans. "It is true," she said boldly, her voice steady. "I carry a child human and Katal." Gasps and whispers spread among both groups. The Katal warriors exchanged worried glances while the human soldiers stared in shock. No one knew how to react, how to handle something so unexpected. Then Jonas stepped forward again, facing both sides calmly. "This child," he began clearly, "can bring our worlds together. It can be the bridge we always needed, if only we choose peace." The Katal leader hesitated, conflicted. "You risk everything, Vexera," he warned again. Though his voice softened slightly, "I risk nothing," she answered firmly, "because this child is everything." Quietly, one Katal warrior lowered his weapon first, stepping back respectfully, then another, slowly, reluctantly. The rest did the same, their leader sighing deeply as he finally lowered his own weapon. Vexera felt Jonas's hand tighten on hers gently, reassuringly. Both sides stood still, weapons lowered, uncertainty slowly replaced by quiet hope. Months later, deep inside a neutral space station, representatives from both species met again. This time, no one laughed, no one mocked. Instead, all eyes watched as Vexera carefully stepped forward, Jonas proudly beside her. In her arms was the child, small, delicate, beautiful, a child with silver skin and human eyes, the first true child of two worlds. She lifted her voice clearly. calmly, facing both her own people and the humans who watched in awe. "This child proves we are stronger together than apart," she announced. "It proves unity is possible, and peace begins with understanding." Silence filled the hall, not a silence of doubt, but of wonder. Then, slowly at first, then louder. Applause rose from both sides. Vexra looked down at her child, then up at Jonas, her eyes shining. She had mocked the idea of mating with a human, laughed at the thought, but now, in her arms was the proof she had been wrong. Not weakness, not betrayal, but a new strength, born from courage and love. And as both worlds cheered, Jonas held her close, whispering softly into her ear, "Our child will change everything." She smiled back gently, her heart finally at peace. "No," she whispered softly, "our child already has."